This is a CB900, also known as the 919 Hornet in the United States. This is a 2007, but this bike was produced from 2002 until 07. This is a 919cc liquid-cooled inline-4 making 108 horsepower and 92 pound-feet of torque. The bike makes all that torque starting at 6,500 RPM. This motorcycle right here has impressed me in ways that I didn't think it would impress me in. I've owned the bike for about a month now, and I've put quite a few miles on it, and I've actually been daily riding it. This bike right here was made in competition with the Kawasaki ZRX 1200 and the Yamaha YZ... I always forget the Yamaha's name. Always forget it. The Yamaha FZ1, which is a 1000, and the Kawasaki obviously a 1200 or an 1100. At the time this bike came out, Kawasaki had already rolled out the 1200, which was a 4-cylinder with carburetors. Between the two, the FZ1 kind of gets a little underrated. This bike is also extremely underrated, and the ZRX does get a fair amount of love. Compared to the ZRX, the biggest difference is between the bikes, this is actually fuel injected, while that one is still carbureted. This is a much slower motorcycle than the other two because it is smaller, but this bike does shine in a major way, and let me tell you why. It's because it's a Honda. Honda has superior build quality and reliability, and that is one of the major things I saw, and I knew I had to have the bike as soon as I read one certain thing. And that thing is, I looked up common issues with this motorcycle right here, and I saw not one but two forum posts read, "It has no common issues," which is absurd, because that never happens with any bike. Almost all motorcycles have a small quirk or something that needs to be replaced, but in terms of the CB900 here, it doesn't have any. Now with age, things will deteriorate and it's going to need normal maintenance, but as far as maintenance goes, the CB900 is a very easy bike to maintain. It does have a decent amount of vacuum hoses underneath this tank here, but those can be deleted if needed. Otherwise than that, service intervals are pretty just regular oil changes, fluid changes, and every now and then you gotta check the valves. And that's basically the bare minimum with any motorcycle, and that's all you gotta do with this bike right here. As far as a riding aspect with the bike, there's one major issue that this bike has. But before we get into that issue, let's talk about some of the positives. This was the true beginning of the naked sport bike, where you lift up the handlebar a little bit and you get rid of all the fairings. Because of the handlebar, this bike is extremely comfortable to ride. You have an upward seating position. The seat is very comfortable, a little skinny for my liking, but still comfortable for 30, 40 an hour ride. A little bit more than that, it gets a little aching, but it's really not the end of the world. This bike is fairly heavy. This bike does weigh over 400 pounds, closer to 500 pounds, but the weight and the balance of the bike is pretty easy to maneuver. This bike has an upright position, and because of that, the weight is brought up quite a bit, and it does have a very middle weight. When you get on a motorcycle, especially a sport bike, most of the weight is tried to be pushed as low as possible, but with this bike it's kind of like center balanced a little bit. The bike revs all the way up to 9,500 RPM, and the top speed is allegedly 135 miles per hour, but I can tell you for a fact, it definitely goes faster. This bike has a 6-speed gearbox, dual disc brakes in the front, single disc in the rear, and it has a double-sided swing arm. The reason Honda did double-sided instead of single-sided, even though it would have saved a little bit of weight with the single side and it would have been a little bit more performance based with the single side, the dual tends to be a little bit more robust throughout the years, and Honda wasn't making the fastest bike, but they were making something just really good all around, and this bike is really impressive at that. The thing I was impressed with this bike the most was the fact that it is so comfortable. I was expecting the bike to be a little bit more performance oriented rather than comfortability oriented and practicality oriented, but this is a really good, like, everyday bike. There's a lot of bikes in my collection where I could not ride them every day, but this is one of those bikes, and I have been daily riding this ever since I bought it. It's a phenomenal machine for that, and very impressive. In 2004, Honda did some minor updates to the bikes. The biggest thing out of all of that is the adjustable front suspension. So if you are looking for one of these bikes, I suggest you get a later year. They refined the paint a little bit. The earlier bikes had some flake issues, but also adjustable front suspension. Why would you not want that? For the price of these motorcycles, they're absolute bargains, and I can't believe you can pick up one of these bikes under the $4,000 price point for clean examples. Unfortunately, a lot of these bikes did get some poor modifications done to them, but you can still find nice ones out there. Now, to talk about the worst thing about this motorcycle right here, that would have to be the vibration. Now, in the last video, I did mention the vibration, and a lot of my comments did come up with one or many things that could fix the issue. The biggest one being replacing the handlebar. This handlebar is very skinny. Your hands are very close together, and for how big the tank is, how robust the tank is, it makes the bike feel a lot smaller because of the handlebar. But one of the downsides is you get crazy vibration, and even in the early 2000s when the bike came out, journalists were talking about the vibrations this bike got, and they never decided to fix it. The vibration in the handlebar is quite bad. If you're going 65, 70 miles per hour plus, and you're riding for 45 an hour, you're going to have your hands stinging like crazy. I bought this bike about an hour and a half away, and when I got home, my hands were just stinging from the vibrations of the bike. Now, you can fix that with a little bit of a bigger handlebar, which is something we might experiment with, but it still has vibration in the tank. When you put your legs against it, you can feel the tank vibrating like crazy. You get a little bit in the seat, but it's really not that bad because the seat is pretty padded, and you do feel it in your legs just a little bit. The worst of it is in the tank and in the handlebar, which can be fixed, but it's something you have to mention because it came like that from the factory. And that's really the biggest downside of this bike right here, other than one other thing I'd like to mention, and that would be the storage capacity. Now, motorcycles obviously are not the most practical vehicles if you're looking to haul things, but if we do take this seat off, there's not really any space underneath here. You have the toolbox, but between the seat there isn't a glove box. There's no space whatsoever to put a hat, your wallet, your gloves. There's nothing. And for how easy and practical this bike is in every other aspect, it's a little unfortunate that the bike doesn't have a little bit more space under the seat. Really not the end of the world, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's a motorcycle, so you can always just wear a backpack. Now, how do you get this back in? There we go. Right now, I'm currently in the middle of hypermiling this motorcycle, but I have got between 40 and 55 miles to the gallon. The first time I got 54, and the second time I believe I got 42, and I was hammering it pretty hard on that second gas tank. And that's just a little bit about this bike right here. I mean, it's a fantastic machine, and for the price these things go for, I really don't think, if you're looking for just a super nice bike to ride, this is one of the best bang for bucks that you can get. It's not old, it's not vintage, but it's just a very nice cruiser. But at the same time, this bike does make a good power and is a whole lot of fun, even though it is a little bit on the heavier side, so it's the one thing to keep in mind. The fact that it is fuel injected for me is a massive win. So let's turn this bike on and let you guys hear it a little bit with that stock exhaust. Right now, what I'm going to do is just pull the throttle advancer a little bit. They don't have a choke, but you can advance the throttle on a cooler day like this to warm the bike up a little bit more efficiently. Let it warm up for just a second, and I'll turn that throttle advance off all the way. I love kind of the whistle and the chop this bike has. Wasn't really expecting that out of this bike. I was kind of expecting a little bit more refinement, I guess you can say. Sounds pretty good for being a stock exhaust though. Now, I talked about this a little bit. The bike sounds good from stock. It has a good amount of noise, but I'd love to hear it with an open exhaust. And I'm just gonna shut it off. And that's all I have for this bike. If you guys did find this video informational, helpful, I just want to talk a little bit about the CB900 and a little bit about my impressions, as well as a little bit about the bike, because I think it deserves to have a little bit of a spotlight shined on it, because I didn't really know about this bike, and a lot of people, I feel, just like don't know about it, and the people who have owned them absolutely love them, including myself. That's all I have for this video. If you guys did enjoy, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video.